This Barrage Rogue build is probably the strongest marksman build out there that manages to combine the best of the melee and range playstyles into a build that has it all in my eyes. We do massive damage to giant groups of enemies through constant explosions and a never-ending rain of arrows. We can literally use our barrage ability infinitely against bosses to nuke them down. And most importantly of all, we have insane healing with this build, which a lot of other rogue builds lack. Trust me, you can literally stand in the middle of an elite pack, keep spamming barrage and not have to use a single potion. That's how potent the healing is. The first ability you want to unlock is your basic skill Puncture, whereby you throw a dagger towards your enemy. Every third cast will have a chance to slow your enemy, and if it's a critical strike then it will guarantee slow them. You don't want to level this beyond rank 1 out of 5, at least for the first 30-40 levels, as there's far more important skills to unlock and there's very little return gain from that skill point. Make sure you get Enhanced Puncture for more energy generation, and more importantly Fundamental Puncture, which splits the dagger into 3 throws with an overall boost to damage, and more importantly for the build, it applies Vulnerability. Vulnerability applies a debuff to enemies, so you hit them for a minimum of 20% more damage. Our main ability is going to be Barrage, whereby we release 5 arrows in front of us in a cone, whereby each arrow has a chance to ricochet off and deal further damage. With Enhanced Barrage, that ricochet chance is increased to 100% for enemies that are vulnerable or critically striked. And then with Improved Barrage, every third shot of Barrage makes enemies vulnerable, which is going to increase damage and ricochet chances even more. At level 15 you gain access to the rogue specific questline, which unlocks combo points which further enhances your barrage. And at this point your rotation becomes simple. Use Puncture 3 times to build up combo points and then unleash your barrage ability, which with 3 combo points now does way more damage and it fires 8 arrows instead of 5. Now there's an aspect that you can unlock pretty early on in the game called Aspect of Arrow Storms, which what it does is give you a 10% chance with each marksman skill you use to generate an arrow storm over the enemy's location, and you can have 5 arrow storms out simultaneously at once. What a lot of people forget is that Puncture is actually a marksman skill even though you're using a dagger, so both Puncture and Barrage can proc this aspect. Now literally all of our insane healing comes from siphoning strikes, whereby whenever you critically strike close enemies, you heal yourself for 3% of your maximum life. Now, why this build specifically has insane healing is because there's just so many things in this build causing hits. We have 8 arrows from Barrage, each of which that can ricochet, arrow storms raining down, up to which we have 5 out at once, and you're going to be doing a ton of critical hits from all of this, and each one is going to heal you for 3%, which quickly adds up. I will say for bosses, this is one rogue build where you do want to switch to Inner Sight, because you'll be able to fire off Barrage infinitely by holding it down and it won't cost any energy, meaning you can do some serious damage. I see a lot of players making this mistake early on, and that's unlocking tons of offensive abilities, of which you won't be able to use them all on the battlefield because you have limited energy resource. Instead, you want some abilities which are cooldown based instead, rather than using up energy. The only agility ability you need for this build is Dash, which gives you 2 charges that lets you maneuver the battlefield effectively while dealing some damage. I would definitely get Enhanced Dash, as that increases critical strike damage for 5 seconds for any enemies damaged by your dash. Dark Shroud is going to give you even more damage reduction, up to a maximum of 40%. You gain 5 charges of this, and each time you're hit, you're going to lose 8% of that damage reduction. So make sure you keep refreshing Dark Shroud whenever it's available to get the maximum damage reduction. Enhanced Dark Shroud gives it a 10% chance that on a hit you don't lose the 8% damage resist, and then countering Dark Shroud is super nice because when you have 4 or more active Dark Shrouds, you gain a whopping 8% critical strike chance. You definitely want to pick up Weapon Mastery fairly quickly as well. With bows we get 12% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, which if you remember both our Barrage and Puncture abilities apply, and for crossbows you get 15% increased critical strike damage. And bows shoot faster than crossbows, meaning you have more opportunities to do critical strike damage and heal yourself. You want to pick up 3 ranks of exploits. You do increased damage by a massive 18% when enemies are either at the top top end of their health bar or at the bottom end. Remember, for any passives, when you're leveling, don't prioritize them early on. It's way more fun to unlock new abilities in my eyes before you start making them 3 out of 3. For this build, when we're dealing with large groups of enemies, we're going to be using Shadow Imbuement because Shadow causes explosions and is great for taking out groups of enemies. What Shadow Imbuement does is power up your next 2 attacks with Shadow Energy. In this build, that will be your penetrating shot primarily, but also dash can be imbued as well. Enhanced Shadow Imbuement gives you even more critical strike chance, a whopping 15% against injured enemies infected by Shadow Imbuement. And then blended Shadow Imbuement makes enemies affected by the initial explosion vulnerable. We also pick up Poison Imbuement for this build because when you want to deal with bosses or you want large single target DPS, Poison Imbuement is going to be a lot better because it applies a damage over time. Enhanced Poison Imbuement increases the poison damage over time by 1 second longer, and more importantly unlocks Blended Poison Imbuement, whereby critical strikes deal 75% increased poisoning damage. Precision Imbuement here is great and increases your critical strike chance by 9% when 3 out of 3. You will eventually make Poison and Shadow Imbuement 5 out of 5, but again you can leave them 1 out of 5 until later on when leveling. You want to unlock your key passive Precision as soon as it's available. It's going to progressively stack up critical strike damage bonuses, and when you reach maximum stacks, it's going to guarantee a critical strike that does 40% increased damage. Again, we're stacking so much critical strike chance and damage just by the build itself, you're going to hit some pretty big numbers. You want 1 point in Shadow Crash, which has a 10% chance to stun enemies when using Shadow Imbuement. However, the bonus here is to unlock Consuming Shadows, whereby whenever you kill an enemy with shadow damage, you generate a massive 30 energy. Honestly, whenever you're using Shadow Barrage, it's going to feel like you're not running out of energy. Then finish off the build by getting 1 point in Adrenaline Rush so you can unlock Haste, which 3 stacks of which will give you a bonus to movement speed or attack speed depending on your energy resource levels. Now, I've talked about one aspect, Arrow of Storms, which you can get from the Howling Warren dungeon in Skull's Glen, but the other aspect I'd recommend, which you can get early on in the game, is Edgemaster's aspect, which is obtained from the Old Stones dungeon in Skull's Glen as well. What this does is it increases your barrage damage based on how much energy you have. Remember, with Inner Sight, you're going to be at maximum energy for 4 seconds while infinitely spamming barrage. It's good in general as well for adds when the bonus kicks in, as you don't have to adjust your playstyle. Finally, the aspect of branching volleys is another great aspect for this build, which has a chance to split arrows into 2 when they ricochet, but it's unlocked later in the game in Hawazar in the Shadowed Plunge dungeon, so all the footage you're seeing for this leveling build is without this aspect. So you guys get a realistic representation of what a barrage leveling build looks like. And honestly, this build melts without it. But if you do get lucky and get this early on, or if you're looking to use this build for more endgame purposes, then for a barrage build, this aspect is a must. So there's my Barrage Rogue build that will have you breezing through the entire campaign and even beyond into the endgame. If you enjoyed what I talked about today, remember to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more Diablo builds as we get deeper into the game. I'm Mr. On It, and that's it for today. Peace out, guys.